The dark history of American chattel slavery is a deeply disturbing chapter in the nation's past, marked by inhumanity, brutality, and dehumanization. Chattel slavery in the United States, which endured from the early 17th century until the Civil War in 1865, was characterized by the commodification of human beings and the systematic denial of their basic rights and dignity. One of the most harrowing aspects of American slavery was the existence of breeding farms, also referred to as slave breeding or human breeding farms. This practice involved treating enslaved individuals as mere commodities for the purpose of procreation. Slave owners sought to increase their human property by encouraging and often coercing enslaved men and women to have children. The offspring born on these farms were considered property and could be sold or traded at the owner's discretion. The dehumanizing nature of slave breeding was profound. Enslaved individuals were reduced to their reproductive capabilities, their agency stripped away, and families often torn apart as children were separated from parents. This practice not only perpetuated the cycle of enslavement but also added another layer of psychological trauma and suffering to an already oppressed population. Another horrific practice was the exploitation of enslaved men through a process known as buck-breaking. This involved the brutal sexual assault and humiliation of enslaved males, usually in a public setting. The term buck referred to a strong and defiant enslaved man. The purpose of buck-breaking was to emasculate and subjugate the enslaved population, reinforcing the power dynamics of slavery. This degrading practice aimed to crush any resistance and establish a sense of dominance by the slave owner over the enslaved community. Sexual violence was pervasive within the system of American slavery. Enslaved women were subjected to rape and sexual exploitation by their owners, overseers, and other white men. The vulnerability of enslaved women was heightened by their lack of legal protection and the power dynamics that favored their oppressors. This sexual exploitation was a means of exerting control, instilling fear, and further degrading the humanity of the enslaved population. The institutionalized brutality of chattel slavery extended beyond these explicit forms of violence. The everyday life of enslaved individuals was marked by forced labor, constant surveillance, and harsh punishment for perceived disobedience. Whippings, branding, and mutilations were common methods of discipline. The intent was not only to control the bodies but to crush the spirits of those held in bondage. Chattel slavery in America became legalized through a series of colonial and state laws that evolved over the 17th and 18th centuries. The institution was entrenched in economic interests, and laws were established to legitimize the enslavement of Africans and their descendants. The Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, for instance, formalized the status of enslaved individuals as property, while other Southern colonies followed suit. The U.S. Constitution of 1787 indirectly acknowledged slavery, and the Fugitive Slave Clause upheld the rights of slaveholders. Subsequent laws and compromises further entrenched slavery, culminating in the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The dehumanization inherent in American chattel slavery was reinforced through the legal system. Enslaved individuals were considered property, not citizens, and were denied basic rights. They could not marry without their owner's consent, and any semblance of education or self-improvement was prohibited. The brutality of slavery was not only physical but also extended to the denial of intellectual and emotional development. The abolitionist movement, which gained momentum in the 19th century, sought to expose and eradicate the horrors of slavery. Narrative accounts, such as those by former slaves like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs, provided a first-hand look at the brutal realities of slavery, challenging the dehumanizing narratives perpetuated by slave owners. The abolitionist movement ultimately culminated in the Civil War, leading to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared enslaved individuals in Confederate states to be free. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in 1865, officially abolished slavery. However, the legacy of slavery's brutality and its impact on generations of African Americans continues to shape the nation's social, economic, and cultural landscape. Recognizing and acknowledging this dark history is a critical step in addressing the enduring impact of slavery. The contemporary struggle for racial justice and equality is deeply connected to the legacy of American chattel slavery. Understanding the systemic dehumanization that characterized slavery is essential for fostering empathy, dismantling systemic racism, in working towards a more just and equitable society.